Dragon's Eggs by J. M. Newsom. Chapter 1. Punishment. The day before I met Sibongile was my last day at school. I'd been at an expensive private high school in Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe, for 7 years. But on the day I met Sibongile, I woke up in the small village of Mangwe Ford. The houses were huts made of mud and grass. There was no electricity or running water, and the nearest telephone was 2 hours' walk away. I felt lost, like a train without its rails. The sun was rising when I came out of the guest hut where I'd slept. In front of me was a clearing in the forest, with huge trees all around it. Sunlight sliced between the branches. On the other side of the clearing, a tall young woman with a huge basket on her head was walking away from me along a path. Dust rose round her feet. There was no one else around, but I could smell smoke from a cooking fire somewhere. My 6-year-old brother, Amos, who'd slept beside me on the floor, had gone out earlier. I stepped away from the door, and a second young woman, who was hurrying to catch the other one up, ran into me. Her basket went flying. T-shirts, dresses and underwear rained down as I held her arm to stop her falling over. I didn't see you," she said. "Obviously," I replied. "Are you okay?" She looked up at me from under her eyelashes with a wide smile. "I'm fine, but you're standing on my best dress." I stepped back. A dress had fallen on the path. It was very dirty. "I'm sorry," I said. "You're going to do your laundry?" "Yes," she said, picking up the clothes and putting them back in the basket. "The clothes were already dirty, but you've made them worse. Your punishment is to help us." "Punishment?" I said, surprised. "Certainly. Follow me." She lifted her basket back onto her head and set off, her body moving invitingly. I was confused about this punishment. Was it something accepted in village culture, or just her way of laughing at a new arrival? But I followed anyway, enjoying watching her from behind. We passed under the trees, crossed a wide area of white sand, and came to the river. The other young woman was already knee-deep in the water, beating clothes on the rocks. She looked at me and smiled. A polite, friendly smile. My knees went weak, and I sat down rather suddenly on a rock. The young woman I'd followed said, "I'm Beatrice." She waved a hand at the tall one. "And that's Sibongile." I swallowed. "Hi," I said. What was wrong with my voice? Sibongile said, "Hi," and went back to work. Beatrice said to me, "Here, take my dress, wet it and beat it on the rock, like this." But I sat with the dress in my hands. I hardly heard what Beatrice said because I was watching Sibongile. "Okay," said Beatrice. "If you don't know how to wash clothes, you'll have to tell us all about yourself." "Will that be my punishment?" I asked. She nodded. "What's your name?" she shot at me. "Tendai Muruvi," I answered. "And how old are you?" 18, I said. "I finished school yesterday." "Which school?" "A private school near Harare." Maybe Sibongile couldn't hear me. I spoke a little louder over the sounds of the river and the laundry. My dad's boss, Owen Woods, was rich until last week. He paid for me to go there and wanted me to go to university. Beatrice spoke as she worked. Is your dad the man who is ill? What does he do? Now, nothing. He was chief mechanic on Mr. Woods' orange farm near Harare. The Woods family left suddenly last week, and the farm was taken over 2 days later. Beatrice and Sibongile looked at each other. I guessed they already knew about Mr. Woods' farm and all the workers being forced to leave due to the land reform program. They knew because my stepmother, Abigail, came from this village. She'd brought my sick dad and my brother and sisters here 3 days ago, because she had nowhere else to go. I said, "But you know all that already." Sibongile didn't react. I stood up, ready to leave. My legs were okay now. But Beatrice wasn't going to let me go. "Why didn't you come with your family?" "Because I was still at school when the farm was occupied," I said. "I came here on the bus from Harare. It took all day and left me at Baobab Cross. I walked from there." Sibongile looked up. "Do you know Harare?" she asked. "A bit," I answered. She really was lovely. I sat down again. "Do you play any sports?" asked Beatrice. Sibongile looked away again, the flying drops of water from her work making shining lines of light in the sun. "I was captain of the school rugby team," I answered. Beatrice smiled at me. "Did you bring anything nice with you, like chocolate?" They both exploded with laughter. I stood up. "Ladies," I said, "I must see how my father is." "Wouldn't you like to ask us anything?" Beatrice asked. I was suddenly full of anger. "Lots of things," I shouted. "What will my family do here? Will my dad recover? How am I going to study now? How do I get out of here?" They both looked at me in surprise. Then Sibongile came over to me, looked me in the eyes and said, "This is quite a large village, you know, even though it's so new. We have cows, chickens and goats, and vegetable gardens. We have cool shade and water all year round. It was built near the wildlife park for tourists to visit. There are no tourists now, of course, but compared to other places, we're lucky." Her lovely face was completely serious. She was trying to make me feel better, but I hardly heard her words. I was trying very hard not to put my arms around her and squeeze her till she couldn't breathe. I'd never felt like that before, and it confused me. Stupidly, I said, "I didn't want to come here." "It's not so bad," Sibongile said. "When we first came, I missed my cell phone and the TV and stuff. But it gets easier." "How?" I asked. She turned back to her work with a smile. "For a start," she said, "we have a wind-up charger for our cell phones now. We can charge up the batteries by hand." "But," said Beatrice, "there's no signal, so they're useless anyway." They both laughed at this wonderful joke. I turned back. Chapter 2. Thieves. My dad was still sick. He was sitting on the earth bench by the wall in the main guest hut. His skin was dry and grey, and he seemed blind, although his eyes were open. When I spoke to him, he didn't answer. My worry and anger were like dark clouds in my mind. But my excitement at meeting Sibongile was like the sun shining between them. I went out to sit near the fire. My baby sister, Gugu, was sleeping in a box on the ground. My stepmother, Abigail, brought me tea. "When did Dad get like this?" I asked. "After they occupied the farm," she replied, sitting down on a cloth on the ground. "He went into Harare to find work, but there were hundreds of men and no jobs. He came back, went into our house, and I found him like this in the kitchen." "I remember hearing that he did this when my mum died," I said. "It seems that he got better in a few days." Abigail shook her head. "He just sits, looking at his feet." "It's been such a shock for him," I said. "For all of us." "Your brother and sister don't seem too upset," said Abigail, with the first smile I'd seen on her face since I arrived. "Amos has found lots of friends and memories already planning our new huts." Baby Gugu began to wake up. Two older women came and joined us by the fire. They started talking to Abigail about making a new vegetable garden, so I went back to my hut and began to unpack. Most of my stuff was in plastic bags. I'd had to leave a lot behind at school. They said I could collect it later. When the plastic bags were empty, I wasn't sure what to do with them. But Amos had suddenly appeared, and he knew. "Can I have those?" he asked. "Sure," I said. "What do you want them for?" "A ball." He laughed up at me, his teeth shining white in the dark hut. "Of course. Want some help?" I felt myself smiling. His little round cheeks caught the light from the door. He took my hand and led me outside. We sat on the earth with our backs against the mud wall of the hut. It was shady there, under the huge trees. I started knotting the bags together. But my confused thoughts made me too fierce, and the plastic tore. Amos's big eyes looked up at me. I tried again. Two more 6- or 7-year-old boys came across the clearing in front of us. They stood watching me, waiting. "How's that?" I asked Amos when I was satisfied. "Great!" He jumped up and reached for the ball. I stood up and kicked it out into the sunshine. Like magic, 5 or 6 more boys appeared. Amos got to the ball first, and the game began. I watched them for a moment. They were so happy, laughing and shouting. I went back into the hut to look at what I'd brought with me. There was my school uniform, which I would never wear again, the jeans I was wearing and another pair, 2 or 3 t-shirts, and 2 pairs of shoes, probably as many clothes as most people who lived in the village. And I had some books, my maths things, and my cell phone. But I doubted we could afford to pay for that, even if there'd been a signal. One minute I was thinking, life is trying to punish me, and I wanted to swear or punch someone. The next minute, I was smiling and remembering Sibongile's face. Now I know what mixed up means, I thought, laying out my clothes on my shelf with great care. Abigail came in with baby Gugu tied on her back. She had some clean clothes in her hands. "These are Amos's," she said. She went over and started arranging Amos's things on his shelf. I took Gugu's little hand between my fingers and made faces at her. She laughed. The kids outside were making a lot of noise as they played. Abigail turned to me. "Uncle Winston and Aunt Ivy want us to eat with them today. I'm going now to help prepare the meal." As so often with Abigail, I couldn't be sure what she wanted from me. Abigail's Uncle Winston was the head of the village, Chief Majosi. I'd met him and Aunt Ivy the night before. I knew this meal would be important. I was just going to ask her if I should go with her to help when the noise of the football game suddenly stopped. We went out to see why. The children were all standing silently under a large tree, looking up. I called out, "What's wrong?" Amos pointed up. "A monkey stole the ball," he shouted. He sounded so horrified that we all laughed. Our laughter frightened the monkeys, and they started towards the river, jumping through the branches. I ran after them with the others. At the edge of the riverbed, the trees stopped. The monkeys gathered together in the last branches and had a shouted discussion. The riverbed sand was so white that it hurt my eyes in the midday sun. The children were jumping up and down, shouting at the monkeys, "Thieves! Thieves! Give it back! You'll get sick if you eat it," Memory called to the monkeys. She was only 11, but already behaved like a little mother. The monkeys began to fight over the ball, their screams echoing through the forest. Finally, they threw it down onto the sand at the foot of a huge tree. All the boys ran towards it, with Amos in front. He always was the fastest runner. I watched as Amos turned on one foot to kick the ball back, and suddenly flames and smoke shot out of the ground. Chapter 3. Blood. Amos rose into the air and hung there for a moment like a broken doll. He fell back onto the sand, screaming. Something else fell further away, and the smoke began to clear. The sound of the explosion and Amos's scream reached me in the same second. I ran forward, Abigail just behind me. Amos lay on his back, his arms waving crazily in the air. One hand was hanging loose, almost completely cut off. Half his left leg was missing. Blood shot into the air with the regular beat of his heart. It made red lines of drops on the sand and the clothes of the children. Abigail fell on her knees beside him, trying to stop the blood with her hands. I raced towards the huts to get help. And I ran into Dad. He was running towards me. Aunt Ivy was with him. She had a piece of cloth and a short stick. We got back to Amos. Aunt Ivy tied the cloth round his bleeding leg, put the stick through it, and began turning. The blood stopped. Meanwhile, Dad had torn a piece of cloth off his shirt. He turned to Abigail and tried to speak, but Memory was ready and handed him a strong stick. They stopped the bleeding in Amos's arm. His hand had fallen off. Abigail took over from Aunt Ivy, who ran back to the huts. Amos had stopped screaming. He was unconscious. In the strange silence, Abigail said to Dad, "Shamba, he needs to go to hospital." Dad picked Amos up as if he was as light as a leaf and began running. He ran away from the river on the dirt road that led to Baobab Cross. Abigail turned to me. "Please, Tendai," she said, and this time I knew what she wanted. I ran after Dad. As I passed, Aunt Ivy rushed out of a hut with a backpack. She pushed it into my hands. "Thanks," I called and ran on. I don't remember much of the journey, except thinking I was glad I'd trained so hard for the rugby team at school. I concentrated on where I was putting my feet. The road was stony in places. I'd walked it from the bus, but it had been dark and I'd been going slowly. Now it was light, and we needed to run like cheetahs. We both slowed down a bit for the steep rise halfway, but it was downhill from there. A bit later, Dad tripped and fell onto one knee. We stopped for a moment, too breathless to speak. I found a bottle of water in the backpack. Dad poured some into Amos's mouth, and we drank a little, taking turns. I also found my cell phone. Good old Aunt Ivy. There was no signal, but the battery was still alive. "Shall I take him for a bit?" I asked. Dad gave Amos to me without a word. We ran on. When we could see the group of huts that was the Baobab Cross Hotel in the distance, I thought of the phone again. I stopped and gave Amos to Dad. Drops of our sweat fell on Amos's face. Dad gently wiped them off. I had a signal. Dad tried again to give Amos some water, while I called the emergency services. In the end, I got the hospital in Sikumi, the nearest town. They sent out a car to meet us. In the car, Amos woke up. Well, he didn't exactly wake. He opened his eyes and looked straight through us. I thought that might be the end, but Dad got him to swallow some water. In less than half an hour, we were at the hospital. They took Amos from us and disappeared inside with him. Later, Dad and I sat in silence, side by side in the waiting room. We'd been to the men's toilets and washed the blood off. No one had said whether Amos would live or die. The nurses had taken some blood from my dad and me to put in the hospital blood bank. Amos had needed a lot of blood. And now my head felt like it was going round and round. It was like being very drunk, I suppose. A nurse had brought us tea with sugar. As we sat, a young woman in jeans came up to us. "Are you with the boy hurt by a landmine?" she asked. I looked at Dad quickly. He was shaking his head very slowly, so I said, "Yes?" I made it a question. "Hi, I'm Zola. I'm a volunteer. In my spare time, I help out with an organization that takes care of people like your boy. I just wanted to say that there may be other landmines." Her fingers were very thin, with long nails painted pale blue. She held a notebook and a pen. "Most landmines," she went on, "are in known minefields. They were mapped and marked with signs, although the signs have gone now. People are saying that a few landmines were laid without maps by revolutionaries, and no one knows where they are. This may be helpful." She gave me a piece of paper headed, "What to do about landmines." I folded it, put it in my jeans pocket, and said, "Thanks." "There are companies that clear landmines and organizations, like the one I work with, that help people who are hurt. Their names are on that paper," she said. "Thanks," I said again, and she left us. I still felt strange, so I asked a passing nurse if I could have some more tea. She went off with a smile and came back with 2 steaming cups. Before I could say anything, Dad spoke. "Thanks very much," he said to her. Same old voice, same old light in the eyes. She smiled at him, touched his shoulder, and went back to work. She was pretty, I had to admit, but well over 30. "So," I said to Dad, "you're okay if there's a pretty woman around then?" Remember that, he said, with a ghost of a smile. Next time I go away like that, find a beautiful woman and I'll come back fast. But then he turned and looked into my face. What's happened to us, Tendai? His eyes filled with tears. We were both covered in dust and smelled of sweat. He badly needed a shave. I said, We've learned you can run nearly as fast as I can. But we both knew what had happened to us. Disaster. Dad's tears fell onto his trousers. Questions poured out of his mouth. What are landmines doing in that bit of the river? Will it happen again? Will Abigail keep the girls away from the riverbed? Why didn't someone warn us? Perhaps it was the first time, I said. His questions hung in the air, mixing with the hospital smells. He took my hand and held it in his. We sat there, looking at the wall. I remembered the tea. Drink up, I said, with the best smile I could manage. We'll need our strength for the run back. Finally, a woman doctor came out to us. We stood up, and I examined her face. She just looked tired. Chapter 4. Hope. The doctor said, Amos will live. Dad took a deep breath. I let my breath out. But he must stay here for 2 or 3 weeks, she continued, and he'll need more blood. Then he'll need nursing at home for 2 or 3 months or more while his wounds close completely. Thank you, Doctor, Dad said. If you agree, someone from the Landmine Injury Rescue Organization will come and see him before he leaves here. It may be that they can get a leg made for him later. They don't make hands. What do you mean? I asked. The LIRO is an organization that arranges for people who are wounded by landmines to have what are called prostheses. These are artificial arms and legs, so the wounded person can live more normally. I thought, that's what Zola with the blue fingernails must have meant. I hadn't read what she'd given me, and I'd been thinking Amos would be a kind of vegetable for the rest of his life, if he lived. Anyway, he will have a crutch, she added. Dad hadn't been listening. He'd been trying to see into the room where Amos was. He suddenly asked, What's that? It's a wooden stick that fits under the arm and works instead of the missing leg. I didn't... A crutch, of course, he said. They won't be able to make him a leg until he's completely well, she went on. And even then, it's often difficult for children because they're still growing. But Dad was smiling. That's wonderful, he said. Thank you. He took her hand and shook it hard. He's still asleep. The nurse will tell you when you can see him. She smiled a tiny, tired smile, pulled her hand out of Dad's, and left us. Dad put his arms around me and squeezed the breath out of me. Thank you too, Tendai. He was grinning. Without you, I wouldn't have made it, and Amos would have died. I freed myself with a laugh. Well, now you'll have to pay the price. I'm dying of hunger. He let me go and we left the hospital to find food. We went to an eating house and ordered chicken and rice. We sat on high little chairs in the window, looking out. "Eating in a restaurant," I joked. "You a millionaire now?" "Sure." Dad didn't smile. "Enjoy it. We are celebrating." The silence came back, thick and heavy. When we'd had enough, we sat back with mugs of tea. Dad was looking straight ahead at the people in the street. "Do you remember last time you were home from school?" he began. "The winter holidays," I put in. "I passed my driving test." "Right. We had a visit from some guys in uniform?" "Yeah, I remember. They were pretty nasty." "They came again, 3 or 4 times. "So that's why the Woods family left?" I asked. "Yes. I believe Mr. and Mrs. Woods finally got scared," he said. "They just left without telling us. They'd been on the farm for 3 generations. They seem to have gone to Australia. They gave us a good life for a long time. I couldn't bear his being so calm. I shouted at him, "But you worked hard, and now you're left with nothing after all those years, and Memory and Amos won't get their education." He looked at me. "Tendai, you have a right to be angry," he said. "But it doesn't solve anything. I feel powerless too. But we Zimbabweans survive because we can change as our circumstances change. And that's what we have to do now." "But you went away," I said, "and left Abigail to deal with this on her own." Dad looked down again, his eyes full of tears. "I didn't do that on purpose. And I'm back now." I kept quiet. I had no answer except an angry one. After a while, Dad said, "We have to decide how we're going to live. Abigail's Uncle Winston is offering us part of the land where they grow vegetables and help with building some huts, our own little compound. The rains have been bad so far this year, but in Mangwe Ford, they always have water. My own family lands were taken by white people a long time ago, so we have nowhere else to go." I took a deep breath. "Then I suppose we'd better be grateful for the offer to live back in the Stone Age," I said. "Do we have any money at all? Perhaps I can get a job. I went to one of the best schools in the country, after all." Dad smiled, calm as a windless dawn, ignoring my angry voice and my question about money. "Maybe you can. But I hope we can get our home in the village organized first. I need your help with that. Then you can start looking for work." Chapter 5. Back to the village. Later, during the night, we were allowed to see Amos. He was sleeping deeply, a small black boy in a huge white bed. We phoned the Baobab Cross Hotel and left a message for Abigail. It was the nearest phone to Mangwe Ford. We said that Dad would stay with Amos and Abigail should come as soon as she could. We slept on chairs in the waiting room and agreed they weren't as comfortable as the floor of a hut. Then, at first light, I set off back to the village on foot. There was a truck stop with a cafe and bottle store at the edge of Sikumi. One of the drivers was happy to give me a lift if I kept him awake, he said. I told him the story of the latest Will Smith film while his noisy old truck fought with the hills. It was very good to get out at Baobab Cross. Abigail came hurrying towards me from the hotel, her skirt bright blue against the red earth. "Is it true?" she asked. "He'll live?" "It's true," I said. "Amos will live and Dad's okay now." "I didn't dare believe it," she said with a smile. "Memory and Gugu are staying in Uncle Winston's compound. Give them a kiss from me." And she was gone, walking fast down the road to Sikumi. I drank some water and took the red dirt road towards the village. I'd given my cell phone to Dad, as the nurse had said she'd charge it for him. So now I was leaving the last electricity and telephone behind. This thought brought my anger back, and I began to run. I kept my mind busy, making lists of all the bad things that had happened to us, all the bad things that still might happen to us, and what I would do to the people who'd made them happen. That got me about halfway. I slowed to a walk. "Now think about something nice," I told myself. So I thought about Sibongile and the shining drops of water falling round her as she worked, making her t-shirt stick to her skin as they fell on her. I wondered what she'd meant by saying, "When we first came." Where had she come from, and who were we? And how did she make me feel the way she did? She obviously wasn't trying to. I looked up at the clear blue sky, no sign of rain, and saw two great birds circling. All around me were small trees, with wide areas of rocky red earth between them. In the distance, I could see zebra eating tired green grass. Suddenly, they began to run. They crossed the road ahead of me, leaving a cloud of dust. Maybe something big was hunting. These hills were home to a lot more animals than people. I began to run again, too. But when I got to the top of the rise, I stopped to look at the view. 4 or 5 kilometers away, thick forest grew on either side of the wide, sandy riverbed. The river itself was a thin line of rocks and water near the far side. The dirt road wound down and was lost in the forest in front of me. I could see where it crossed the river at the ford, a shallow place with no rocks. It went into the trees on the far bank and came out above them onto low, empty hills. From there, I knew the border with Mozambique was a day's walk away. I hurried on to the village, looking forward to a wash and clean clothes and to seeing Sibongile again, even from a distance. Later, I went to Uncle Winston's compound. I could hear Aunt Ivy singing in her cooking hut. "Knock, knock," I called. She came out calling, "Memory, your brother's back." "Come in, Tendai, come in." Memory sat with me while I ate Aunt Ivy's biscuits and fruit and told her about the hospital. Gugu played outside with some baby chickens. After a few minutes, Uncle Winston came in. He was a tall man with an almost Arab face, wearing jeans and a purple Nelson Mandela-style shirt. "We've never had a landmine in this village before," he told me. "Thank goodness Ivy knew what to do." I said, "Yes, Amos could have died without your help." Aunt Ivy said, "Stop your nonsense." When I'd finished eating, Uncle Winston asked me if I was free. I stood up immediately. "Come with me," he said. "I need your help." We went to his private hut, where there was a desk and bookshelves. On the desk was a letter. There were a lot of corrections on it. "I'm writing to the mayor," he said, "to ask what he's doing about the landmines. We've asked many times for the minefield across the river to be cleared. There was talk of starting some months ago, and now we know there are landmines near the village. I want you to check this letter over for mistakes in the English." Uncle Winston pulled up a chair for me. I checked through the letter and found it almost perfect. Just as I finished, a shadow filled the doorway. Chapter 6. Sibongile. "Ah," said Uncle Winston. "Come in, dear Sibongile. Tendai has given me his opinion. Now you can tell me yours." I didn't hear Sibongile's reply because my heart had started beating too loudly. I stood up to let her sit down at the desk, and I had to hold on to the chair. I'd thought the feeling would get less as I saw more of her, but it was worse. I took a couple of deep breaths, wondering whether she felt it too, but she didn't seem to. When she'd finished, Uncle Winston almost pushed us out of the door together. I walked to the gate and held it open for her. I was in control again now. I tried to look cool, but I felt like I was flying. We walked towards her hut together. "How's Amos?" she asked. "He'll be okay." Trying to look cool wasn't working. Even Amos's terrible problems couldn't stop me smiling. "He'll just need a new leg and to learn to write with his left hand." I suddenly thought, this feeling is called happiness. "That's all, is it?" she asked with her head on one side. She was laughing at me a little. We'd stopped outside her hut. She called to someone inside. "Do you hear that, Useni? Be careful where you walk if you want to grow up with 2 legs." A boy of about 12 came out of the hut. He blew down his nose. "This place is disgusting." "Don't be rude, Useni," Sibongile said, embarrassed. "Tendai, this is Useni, my brother. Useni, if we weren't here, we'd have to live at Grandma's, where there's no water. Here is better." Useni took a last swallow from his can of cola and threw it on the ground. "Why did Mum have to die anyway?" he shouted. "And why won't they let us see Dad?" "Useni?" said Sibongile, pointing to the can. "Let's go and see the guys playing football," I said. Useni looked a bit happier at that, picked up the can and set off across the clearing. A match had started near the road to Baobab Cross. His sister and I followed more slowly. Sibongile means thankful. So I said, "You have a lovely name." But as soon as I'd said it, I felt stupid. I felt better, though, when she said, "Thank you," quietly. "I was wondering," I said, "how long you've been here." "We've visited many times," she said, "but we came about a week ago to stay, maybe forever." "Where were you living before, then?" I asked. "In Harare," she answered. "Our mother died some time ago, and now our father is in hospital, also dying." She didn't sound particularly upset about her dad, I thought. "And his father insisted we came here now, So Useni can start at the church school near Baobab Cross in the new year. But surely you could have stayed in Harare and lived there with your grandfather? I asked. But he doesn't live there, replied Sibongile. He lives here, in Mangwe Ford. He's related to Uncle Winston, like most of us here. And what about your own education? I asked. Just then, Aunt Ivy called from behind us, and we turned. I have to go, Sibongile said, but I have lots of questions I wanted to ask you. Not as punishment for anything, I hope, I said. She laughed and waved as she ran back to Uncle Winston's compound. Was it me or Harare she was interested in? I followed Useni and watched the boys playing, but somehow my eyes didn't see them. All I could think about was Sibongile's lovely face. I couldn't stand still, so I walked back past the huts to the vegetable gardens. I found a small lake filled by a stream running down to the main river. From the lake, there were narrow paths to the gardens. These were inside high fences. There were rows and rows of onions, cabbages, and so on. I walked on along the main path. It was the continuation of the road from Baobab Cross that ran through the village. I'd seen it from the rise on my way back from the hospital. It was wide enough to drive a car along, but there were no tire marks. Where the road turned across the sandy riverbed towards the ford, there was a new garden marked out beside it. I thought, this is where Abigail and Sibongile will work. And that made me wonder whether there was work I could do in the village. To start with, there would be our compound to build, with its huts and the fence all round. I had been planning to get a job in Sikumi when that was finished. But now, with Sibongile in Mangwe Ford, that didn't seem such a good idea. However, it wasn't that easy to get to see her. Aunt Ivy seemed to keep her busy all the time. I didn't see her that evening, except from a distance. The next day, Uncle Winston asked me to start work on our compound. I went a long way down the river with 2 other men to find tall, straight young trees to cut for the bones of the huts. We got back in the evening, and Sibongile, Useni, my sisters and I all ate at Aunt Ivy's table. Useni was feeling better. He liked singing the latest pop songs, and the village boys thought this was brilliant. After the meal, there was quite a party with everyone singing and dancing, but girls danced with girls and boys with boys. So it was only later, when everyone was going to bed, that I had a few minutes alone with Sibongile. I walked with her to her hut. It was completely dark, except for the faint starlight on the river sand, pale between the trees. My whole body felt painfully alive from the music and the excitement of being close to her again. "You don't sing, do you?" she asked. I laughed. "You mean I can't sing? I sound awful." "But you have a beautiful speaking voice." Was she making fun of me? "I used to tell traditional stories," I told her. "When my grandmother, my mother's mother, died, I told her stories to my friends. It was a way of keeping her near." "Your mother died?" asked Sibongile. "When I was born," I said. "So my grandmother was like my mother, until she died too." My chest felt tight. Sibongile's hand found mine and squeezed it in the darkness. "You should tell those stories again," she laughed, lifting our mood. "In the evenings, before the meal." "But they're for little children," I said, holding her hand in both mine. "Make up some new ones," she said. or change some of the old ones. I'll think about it, I said. I didn't want to say good night. Sibongile pulled her hand away. Good night, she said quietly. Sleep tight. Chapter 7. Kisses. Next day, late in the afternoon, I took the wood I'd cut to the place where our compound would be. Then I began looking for Sibongile. Was she avoiding me? I saw Beatrice, who told me Sibongile was busy. There are other people in this village apart from her, you know, she laughed. I'd started having ideas for a story. I decided to find a quiet place to work on it, so I went to sit on the rocks at the top of a small hill just west of the village. The sun was going down when I heard a sound behind me. Someone was climbing up the hill towards me. I thought it was Memory, come to call me in for the evening meal, but it was Sibongile. I stood up slowly, trying to be very cool. Hi, I said. Hi, she replied. She looked around and sat down carefully on the ground, her back against the warm rock. I sat down beside her, not too near. I couldn't think of anything to say. My mind was too full, or too empty. Your dad's a good man, she said at last. He's, well, not the perfect dad, but pretty good, I said. And your stepmother is a bit stressed out, but nice. She's fine. She's been very good to me, I said. She spoke thoughtfully, as though she was talking about a character in a film. My father's a terrible man. He had AIDS and didn't tell my mother. He gave it to a friend of mine too. I was shocked. A friend of yours? I asked. Yes. He tricked my best friend into his bed. She turned to me and said very quietly, She's dead now. And he beat me when I tried to ask him about it. I said, But you're only a child. I mean... She smiled sadly. I'm 17 now. I was 15 then. I didn't know what to say. She continued, And now he's dying too. Stupid, isn't it? I nodded, my eyes on the deep pink clouds. She put a hand on my arm and said, I just wanted you to know the kind of family I come from. You're so sweet. I almost exploded. That was not how I wanted her to think of me. She went on. So sweet. And I think you don't know much about the dirty side of life. I felt shaken. I can't believe, I said. You seem to come from a wealthy home. You seem so... Money isn't everything, she said. Everyone is given a body and a brain and a life. But what we do with our lives is what we give to ourselves, our present to ourselves. She paused and then went on. My father has given himself the present of a horrible death. What could I say to that? I had to change the subject, so I said, I'm working on a story for the kids, about landmines. This village didn't have a problem with them before, did it? Sibongile turned to me and laughed. Such perfect teeth. Aha! So you will tell us a story, she said. Perhaps, I replied. Well, there is a minefield, she began, becoming serious. It's a few kilometers away, across the river. It used to be marked, but people used the metal signs for other things years ago, before this village moved here. So the landmines are from the war, I said. 30 years ago? I suppose so, she answered. At the hospital, I said, there was a woman who told us there might be other landmines in our area. Sibongile's shoulders were tight, her face angry, her eyes half closed against the setting sun. That's another stupid thing people do. Wars. Totally and incredibly stupid. She was far angrier about that than about her father. Then her voice changed, and she turned to me. But, you know, we could do something about that minefield. We could get people together and demand that the landmines are cleared. Her eyes shone, and I felt excited by her energy. I said, the woman at the hospital gave me a list of names and addresses. We could go into Sikumi and email them. I'd taken the paper out of my pocket and left it in the hut. Yes, and we'll go with Uncle Winston to see the mayor. She stood up and clapped her hands. We can put out a message on the internet asking for money and help. We'll make sure everyone hears about Amos. We must do something quickly. I stood and took her shoulders in my hands. You can write down what we're going to say, and we'll go to the internet cafe near the hospital. She looked at me with such an excited expression on her face that I was kissing her on the mouth before I realized what I was doing. A storm of feeling went through my body. I had to stop kissing her so that I didn't fall down. I looked at her face. She looked shocked for a moment, and then smiled a gentle smile. Not a come-on smile, just a friendly, happy smile. Maybe she was ignoring the storm, or maybe she was better at dealing with it than I was. She said, just a little breathlessly, we need to talk to people and plan things. We stood completely still in the last of the sunlight. Yes, I said, we need to think things through. She looked up at me. Why didn't the people who laid those landmines think? Didn't they see what a danger they would be to innocent people after the war? She turned as if to go back down to the village. I was afraid she would rush straight off to start her campaign, and I had other plans. I kept a hand on her shoulder and said, thinking is not everyone's strong point. I turned her towards me again, held her face between my hands, and kissed her, very gently. I was afraid my legs would give way if my body reacted like before. After a moment, she drew away a little, with a sweet smile. No, she agreed. Too many people do things because of how they feel rather than what they think. She was making fun of me, of course, but she wasn't stopping me. I licked my lips. They were so hot they dried immediately. I said, true, but some people decide to follow their feelings rather than their thoughts. That's the difference. I leant towards her again. She grinned at me and said, are you thinking when we kiss? That made me laugh, and she laughed too. I sat down again and answered seriously, looking up at her. Mostly when we were kissing, I was feeling so happy I couldn't think. To my surprise, she sat down and said, good, me too. So she really did like me. We laughed and kissed a bit more. I said, but that doesn't mean I couldn't think if I had to, just that I don't want to. She kissed me back, just a little. After a few moments, she said, I'm beginning to think. I made myself sound cool and lazy. Oh, no, I said. That's bad. Stop, now. She said, her lips moving against mine, "It's getting stronger and stronger, this thought." "No, no," I said in the same position. "Just feel." A second or two later she said, "It's not going away." I leant back. "I suppose you want me to ask what it is." She smiled. "Yes," she said and kissed my cheek. "Okay," I said. "What are you thinking about so much that it stops you kissing me properly? Landmine campaigns? What kind of cabbages to grow?" Her laugh was like church bells. "I'm thinking that we must go back now. If we don't, we won't get any dinner." Of course I didn't want to, but it was better to stop. So I jumped up and said, "So, kissing doesn't fill your hungry little stomach?" I took her hand and pulled her up. "No," she said, making a funny little face. "It's a pity, but it doesn't." The sun had gone. We ran down the hillside in the gathering dark, trying to trip each other up. From then on, I thought about Sibongile so much, it felt as if she was living inside me. But I didn't see much of her, and we were both too busy to do anything about the landmines. And even 3 days later, there was still no answer to Uncle Winston's letter. Chapter 8. Dragon's Eggs. Then my dad came back from the hospital. He was almost his old self, laughing and telling bad jokes. Being a mechanic, he took over the building work, but kindly kept me on as his assistant. He said Amos was eating well, demanding chocolate and TV, but sometimes had bad dreams at night. Abigail would stay with Amos till he could come home. The church she belonged to was paying for his treatment and a place for her to stay in Sikumi. In general, though, Dad was a bit mysterious about money, and I couldn't get him to tell me whether we had any or not. The story went round that the landmine that hurt Amos had been washed down the river by floods. I wasn't sure this was true, but it made us all think carefully about where we walked, and it helped me finish making up my story. The only ones who forgot to be careful were the little kids, of course. So I made my story especially for them. When it was ready, I told Amos's friends I'd be at the village baobab tree at sunset, and there'd be a story. Late that afternoon, I went and sat with my back against the huge tree. There were a few clouds, but still no rain. The sun seemed to be taking a rest on a hill before it disappeared completely, and the clouds flamed pink and orange. I hoped Sibongile would come to the storytelling. I wanted her to see and hear me perform. I shut my eyes and listened. I heard children gathering quietly around me. I heard large birds making a loud fuss as they settled in the forest for the night. I heard monkeys calling far away. I smelled food cooking by the huts. Someone gave a little cough. I opened my eyes and looked at the children. They held their breath, eyes wide open, biting their lips, waiting. Their skin shone like dark metal in the orange sunlight, and the dust hung round them, golden in the still air. I took a deep breath. "Long ago," I began slowly. The children all broke into wide, white smiles, making themselves comfortable and preparing to listen. The sun sank suddenly behind the hill, and the shadows disappeared. "Long ago," I repeated, "when the world was young, high in the mountains, a boy called River was born. He was strong and dark, and he laughed and sang as he ran and jumped down the mountains.
"What did he sing?"
asked a little girl called Fortune. He sang, "You can't catch me," I answered. The children began to sing,
"You can't catch me."
and two of the larger boys began to jump about like River. Memory arrived with Useni and Sibongile and sat down at the back of my audience. I waited until everyone was quiet. On his way, I went on, River met a beautiful girl called Stream. They put their arms around each other, and smiling and whispering, they joined together and travelled on between the hills. I looked at Sibongile. She was looking at me thoughtfully. Some of the children whispered together and put their arms around each other. Later, I said, they came to a wide, flat place called a plain. Around the edges of the plain were mountains and hills. As they travelled across the plain, River and Stream gave birth to lots of children. These little rivers ran along, sometimes beside their parents, and sometimes near the mountains. Some went down holes to water the earth. The whole river family helped people and animals, trees and grass to grow and enjoy life. I lowered my voice. But while River and Stream and all the little rivers were having such a good time, someone else, who lived under the earth of the plain, was getting more and more unhappy.
"Who was that?"
someone whispered. That was Dragon, I answered, raising my voice.
"What's dragon?"
asked Tembi, Fortune's tiny sister, her eyes wide and white. Dragon has a head like a huge horse, I answered, showing with my arms how tall the dragon was.
"And wings,"
added Memory, stretching her arms out.
"And a huge long tail."
And in its big red stomach it makes fire, I said, sitting forward to scare the little ones, which it breathes out of its mouth, whoosh. I showed them with my hands how the flames shot out of Dragon's mouth. The children cried out,
"Eh, eh, eh."
And Dragon was unhappy, I went on. Once, there had been hundreds of dragons living under the earth. They used to breathe through holes, and fire would jump out onto the plain. It burned everything for miles around. But now, so many of River's children ran into the holes in the earth that the dragons were always wet. And when they were wet, the fire in their stomachs went out, and they died. At last, there were only 2 dragons left.
"A mommy dragon and a daddy dragon?"
asked Fortune. That's right, I answered. And Mummy and Daddy Dragon were very scared and very angry. They knew that if they didn't do something, they would die and there would be no more dragons. So, they decided to lay lots of dragons' eggs. The eggs would break open and hatch into little dragons, and the rivers would not be able to put out their fires.
"So, little dragons can breathe fire?"
asked a small boy, his teeth and eyes shining in the growing dark. Oh yes, I answered. Their fire is very hot. The dragons hid their eggs under the earth, sometimes in big groups, sometimes one at a time. They hoped that if all the baby dragons hatched together, maybe the rivers would be dried up in the heat of their fires. I could hardly see the children's faces now in the growing dark, but I could feel them holding their breath.
"And did they kill the rivers?"
asked a small voice. No, They didn't. You know that the rivers still run. As it turned out, the dragon babies did not all hatch at once. Some of them are still waiting in their eggs under the earth.
Is that what hurt Amos?
A boy asked. Yes, I replied. A dragon's egg hatched and hurt him.
How do you know?
Asked another boy's voice in the darkness. You saw it happen, I said. The eggs only hatch if people or animals step on them. I raised my voice.
And then they jump out of the earth with a bang, and they bite and burn. Sometimes they bite off a leg or an arm or both, like Amos. And sometimes they are strong enough to kill.
So it's a dragon's egg that bit Amos, is it? That was Useni's voice, deeply disbelieving. I took no notice. And the dragons laid a lot of eggs near our river and in the hills on the other side. So you must be very careful where you play. Listen to your parents when they tell you not to go somewhere.
Do they know where the dragons left their eggs?
They know some of the places, but the dragons hid so many eggs, no one knows where they all are. So, you should stay where you know it's safe. The children were silent for a few seconds while the night noises grew around us. Even Useni didn't speak. A sudden sound from the huts made everyone jump. Fortune's mother was banging a spoon on a saucepan and calling, "Food's ready!" The children jumped up, laughing and shouting, and ran towards the cooking fires. "Mind the dragon's eggs!" I called as I stood up and stretched. Sibongile fell into step beside me as we walked towards the firelight. Her hand touched mine and held it for a few moments in the darkness. She stopped to look at the remaining light in the sky. A thin new moon had risen. I turned her towards me for a kiss, but she pulled gently away.
"You know," she said, "Uncle Winston likes our being together, but Aunt Ivy and the older women are giving me a hard time. That's why I'm being a bit—"
"Keeping a safe distance?" I asked.
"I suppose that's what they want."
She laughed.
"Just one kiss?" I begged.
I got my kiss, but only the one. Then we hurried down to join everyone for the evening meal. Chapter 9. Lost. The children told their parents how much they liked my story while we ate, and Useni even sang a rap about dragon's eggs. So the next morning I was feeling on top of the world. Sibongile came up to me as I was setting off with Dad to cut the last of our fence posts. She was wearing tight jeans and blue and white trainers. She looked so perfect I could hardly breathe. Dad made a wow face and walked on ahead.
"I didn't tell you how much I liked your story," she said.
I could see that her heart was beating fast.
"Thank you,"
I managed to say.
"You'll be starting to build the fence today," she said, "now that you've got all the wood together."
"Probably," I said.
"I'll be working in the new garden," she said, "but I should be finished before dark." She was asking me for a date. My heart thundered in my ears. "Shall we meet at the rocks on the hill again?" I asked. "To watch the sun go down?" "That would be nice," she said. "Yes, it would," I agreed. "No story tonight?" she asked with a smile. "Not before supper," I answered, grinning. "Maybe round the fire later." "Do you have more stories?" she said as we walked slowly after Dad. There are a million stories. It's a long time since I told any, though. There wasn't much interest in them at school. We laughed. No, there wouldn't be, she said. There's TV and movies and internet in the cities. Here, though, it seems right to tell stories. She stopped and turned to me. I really like it here, but I know it's not your favorite place. I looked into her eyes. We can talk about that this evening, I said. And about getting in touch with the people on the list you got from the hospital. She smiled and turned back towards the village gardens. Those were the happiest minutes of my life. Later that morning, Dad and I were finishing part of the fence when we heard that terrible noise again. Bang! A cloud of black smoke was rising, and we ran towards it. It was near the fenced gardens, where the road turned to cross the river. Everyone from the village was running that way. When we got there, I was at the front. There was a terrible smell of burning, and the smoke was blowing away. The new garden had been cleared of all the trees and bushes. Half of it had been worked on and was ready to plant. There was a deep hole in the line where the work had stopped. The rest was still smooth, hard earth. On that earth was a woman, lying on the ground with two others kneeling beside her, their hands covering their faces. The woman had no head, and, as I got nearer, I saw she had no arms either. There was a lot of blood, but I could still see her blue and white trainers. As I ran to the edge of the clearing to be sick, I saw Sibongile's face looking up at me from the tall grass. It was just her head, there in the grass, the eyes open in surprise, the perfect teeth showing a little between her lips. I stood there, screaming, staring at her. I felt hands pull me away and I shut my eyes, but I could still see her. Then I shook off the hands and ran. I don't remember much of the next few days, but I ran a long way, and Sibongile's face was always there when I shut my eyes. Her gentle voice filled my head as I ran. I really like it here, she kept saying. At one point in the dark, I climbed into a tree. There were monkeys sleeping there, but they kept away from me. Later, I sat among some rocks on a hilltop as daylight began. A family of rock rabbits lived there, and they smelled awful. A small deer jumped up the rocks as the sun came up. It looked around, then jumped back down. It didn't see me. Another time, I drank bitter water from a pool in the rock. It didn't taste good, but I didn't care. I remember standing on an old ant's nest and seeing thousands of deer and zebra. And later, at a big waterhole full of green plants and birds, I was surprised by a buffalo. I was sick and covered it with sand using a stick. I remember a tree with yellow fruit, which was sweet and good. And there was another tree that I climbed up into and ate nuts. I threw the shells down and annoyed some birds that ran about like chickens. My tears fell all the way to the ground and made little holes in the dust. I could feel Sibongile with me all the time. She sometimes said, "We must go," or "Be careful where you walk." And every time I closed my eyes, she was looking at me, her mouth partly open, grass in her hair. A long time later, I sat on a rock by a wide path made by the great, flat feet of elephants. And, when the sky was yellow and pink, They walked by. The largest one almost touched me with her long trunk, but walked on. The little ones had to run to keep up. Something made me follow them. They came to a river, quite a small one. They walked into the water and began rolling around, drinking and washing. I went further up and found a place where the water was cleaner. I drank and washed. I sat on rocks, still warm from the sun, eating some fruit and listening to the elephants finishing their bath. I realized I was still crying. Closing my eyes still seemed impossible, but I must have slept a bit. When day came and I went down to the water to wash my salty face, I saw the footprints of a large cat. They were as big as my hand. Perhaps my crying had frightened it away, or perhaps it hadn't liked my smell. That was when I understood I was lost. I must have entered the wildlife park. It's huge, of course, with very few villages and hundreds of square kilometers of empty land, except for the animals. Fear rushed into me, and I began to shake all over. I looked around, and every bush seemed to hide a lion. I knew then that I should think about going back to the village and my family. But which way was back? Chapter 10. Found. It was terrifying to have my power of thought come back. It came in little waves. That first one, when I realized I was lost, was the worst. My body didn't stop shaking all that day. I thought I'd better follow the river. Rivers attract all kinds of animals, and I might find food more easily there. Later, I realized that being near the river also meant I might become food more easily. I remember lying looking up at the stars, listening to the night. A leopard coughing, the river running over rocks, the insects getting quieter as they cooled down. The stars were like liquid diamonds, millions of them. I wondered how it would feel if they began to fall on me. For the first time in days, I realized Sibongile's voice was quiet, and I wasn't crying. That made me cry again. At dawn, I think it was the next day, I came to a place where the river made a waterfall. I climbed down, but fell the last bit into deep water. I swam to the edge, thinking of crocodiles. As I was getting out of the water, I thought I heard a human voice shout above the sound of the waterfall. I looked around. The trees were quite small here, and there were rocks everywhere. I couldn't see anyone. I emptied out my shoes and set off, following the river again. Not far on, I had to make my way through traffic jams of deer getting their morning drink. The river soon became quite wide, full of sandy islands. I knew crocodiles loved lying on the sand, so I stayed back from the water, under the trees. I had crossed the tire marks in the deep sand before I realized what they were. I ran back and looked at them carefully. They came down to the river, turned in a big circle, and returned. They were wide, perhaps from a small truck, but they looked quite old, the edges breaking down. They climbed a little rise and disappeared. For some strange reason, I decided not to follow them and turned back to the river. "Hey, where are you going?" So it was a human voice. I stood still, looking around. An old woman, black against the sky at the top of the little rise, was leaning on a stick. "I'm looking for Mangwe Ford," I answered. My voice didn't work very well. Don't know it, she said, and laughed like a machine gun. Where are you from? I asked, afraid she'd disappear. Come up here, she called. I climbed up to her and saw miles of empty brown land with a few dusty trees, a giraffe or two, and some rocky hills in the distance. The old woman stood beside me, smelling me. Her head was lower than my shoulders, so I was a bit embarrassed by that. She said, "You're not sick, but you're hungry." She set off, walking fast across the empty land beside the tire marks. I tried to follow, but she walked so fast I got left behind. She came back to me and produced a plastic bottle of water. The water was warm, but so sweet. I hadn't drunk clean water in how many days? "Come on," she said. "It's getting too hot." "How far are we going?" I asked. "To my place," she said. Very helpful, I thought, half running, half walking to keep up with her. At last, we came to a large group of tall trees and bushes. As we approached, she made a high, calling sound. A small boy appeared from between the bushes. We followed him through into a clear space. There were 3 beautiful huts built under the trees. They were perfectly round, with highly decorated walls and patterns cut into the grass roofs. "We're a tourist attraction," the old woman said with her machine gun laugh. "Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday mornings." There was a fat black pot on an open fire. It was steaming and smelled wonderful. I almost fainted as the hunger washed through me, and I had to sit down on the ground. The boy brought me a metal plate of meat and sauce and a piece of bread. The plate was too hot to hold, so he put it on the ground in front of me. The old woman brought me water in a bowl and a small, expensive towel to wash my hands. I ate, using my fingers. I forgot to go slowly and had to stop for a few minutes. My stomach hurt so much. "You've been lost a long time," she said. Just a few days," I said. "And you were in Mangwe Ford?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Is it far?" "Don't know, but the boss at main camp has maps," she replied. "So this is part of a safari place?" I asked. "They come straight from the airport with their cameras." She pointed at my plate. "More?" I can't just now," I said. I could feel my body shutting down. I need to sleep now. I'm sorry." "This way," she said, grabbing my hand and pulling me up. She led me over to one of the colorful huts. Inside was a bed with a grass mattress, a bit different from my blankets on the floor in the village. I don't even remember lying down. When I woke, it was dark. I could hear someone breathing heavily in one of the other huts, and was that a lion in the distance? I remembered where I was and why. I tried to think about the elephants in the water and the sweet yellow fruit, but Sibongile's shoes and the screams of the women wouldn't leave me. "It's not going away," Sibongile said. Chapter 11. Stars. Suddenly, it was day. The old woman stood over my bed. "Tell me what happened before I talk to the boss," she said. "Okay," I said, half asleep. She showed me the toilet hut and the washing place and went to make breakfast. I joined her, and we sat on the ground in silence, drinking tea. After a while, I asked where the little boy was, and she said, "School." "I'm called Tendai," I said. "What should I call you?" "My name is Nomalanga, but you can call me Gogo. Are you ready to talk? She asked. I didn't answer. Gogo was what I'd called my grandmother. Nomalanga took me by the hand and we went and sat under a huge spreading tree. She laid a coloured cloth down on the ground and we sat on it, a little apart. Begin, she said. I began with the family leaving the farm. I told her about the way Dad had gone away and the village. Then I went back and told her about school, about my friends. Good, she said. She got up and brought water and dried fruit. Now, tell me why you ran away. I thought, maybe she thinks I'm a criminal. I told her about Amos and the hospital. But then I was quiet. I could hear Sibongile's voice in my head. She said, but you know, we could do something about that minefield. Again and again. I kept trying to tell Nomalanga about her, but I couldn't. I just saw her head in the grass again, and the blue and white trainers. I began to shake. Nomalanga got up and left me there. I think I slept. When I opened my eyes again, she was back. Mangwe Ford is 80 kilometers away, near the border, she said. I could see the respect in her eyes. Wow, I said. Food? She asked. Thank you, Gogo. Yes, please. It was getting towards sunset. We didn't talk much while we ate. I helped wash the plates. Then she took my hand again and led me to a place beyond the trees. She sat on her cloth and leaned back against a huge rock. I sat down beside her. Look, she said, and waved her hand at the view. There was a large waterhole below us, a splash of green in the red and brown landscape. Hundreds of birds were there, tall, slim ones fishing, and smaller, rounder ones swimming. There was a pair of crazy ones, flying up and rolling and falling out of the sky, their bright blue wings flashing. Nomalanga smoothed the back of my hand with her rough fingers. You must talk to me, she said. You must talk so you can sleep without dreams, live without voices. As I looked out over the waterhole, the sky filled with tiny birds. They made moving patterns as they prepared to settle for the night. I didn't have dreams last night, I said. She laughed gently. You called names in your sleep after you'd spent a long time crying. How can you know that? I asked. You were asleep in your hut. Not all night, she replied calmly. She didn't say any more, but kept hold of my hand. I watched the little birds like smoke against the orange sky. They made a sound like wind in the grass. I forced myself to speak. Her name was Sibongile, I said. As I talked and remembered and talked some more, the tears came again, and I held on to Nomalanga's hand as though she could stop me from drowning in them. When I told her about the dragon's egg story I'd told the children just the day before Sibongile was killed, she held my face between her hands and said, No, dear boy, you are not guilty. It was not your doing. It was dark when I finished. The birds were silent, the insects quiet. Nomalanga didn't speak for a while. Then she said, You have loved and been loved. That is a great gift. She paused. Sibongile died so quickly she didn't feel fear or pain. That is also a gift. She held my hand tight for a moment. There are those who love by holding on. Then she put my hand down on my leg and left it there. And there are those who love by letting go. It's your decision. I couldn't speak, but my heart felt lighter. I heard Sibongile in my head say, "You're so sweet." I felt a small smile on my lips. She wasn't letting go of me just yet, and I was glad. Nomalanga took a breath and blew out through her nose. "Tomorrow's Tuesday," she said. "The tourists will be here a couple of hours after sunrise." She stood up and pulled me up too. "You can get a lift with them to main camp. Then you can ask the boss about getting home." We walked back to the huts in the starlight. "I want to thank you, Gogo," I said. "How can I do that?" "You say you tell stories." I could hear she was smiling in the dark. "Yes, I do. But I would be shy to tell a lady such as you any of my stories." "Then you can be polite and drink a beer with me and listen while I tell you one." Something moved in the darkness near me, making me jump. A young voice said, "Can we listen too, Gogo?" Said Nomalanga, placing her little wooden seat carefully. I could just see 5 children as they sat on the sandy earth in a half circle. I thought, where did they all come from? She handed me a bottle of beer. I sat with the children on the ground. She spent a long time lighting a pipe. The smoke rose, pale as a ghost in the starlight. "Long ago, when the lion was king," she began in the sing-song voice of the traditional storyteller. "There were no stars, and the nights were completely dark." The children and I all looked up at the shining beauty of the sky, trying to imagine complete darkness. "This made King Lion's life difficult," she went on. "During the day, the sun was too hot for him to run and hunt, and during the night, he couldn't see unless there was a moon. And many times, as you know, there wouldn't be one, so he would go hungry for days on end. Once, when he hadn't eaten for some days, he found a group of humans living in a hole in the rocks. Humans were dangerous, so he waited until one of the children came out alone. Then he grabbed it and held it in his mouth. The little boy, for it was a boy, not a girl, thank goodness. The children laughed and the boys clapped. The boy," she went on, "had his catapult with him, and before King Lion could eat him, he shouted, 'Don't try to eat me. I'm very strong, and I have my catapult and my bag of stones. I shall make holes in your stomach, and you will die.'" One of the boys jumped up. "I've got a catapult," he cried, taking a Y-shaped stick from his pocket and making the movements of shooting at birds with it. The other children pulled him down. Nomalanga ignored him. She said, "King Lion was surprised and put the boy down." "But I am very hungry," he said. Nomalanga's voice was deep and sad. "And I can't see in the dark to catch anything else. So I'll just have to eat you and hope you are too dead to hurt my stomach." "No," shouted the boy. "I'll make you some light to hunt by. Just let me live for a few more minutes." King Lion let him go, but he kept a foot on the boy's foot in case he ran away. The boy took out his catapult and a handful of stones. He pulled with all his strength on the catapult and shot a stone high into the black sky. After a second or two, a tiny light, appeared in the blackness. The boy shot another stone, and another light appeared. He shot more and more stones into the sky, and more lights appeared. King Lion was very surprised, and his laugh was like thunder. "How do you do that?" he cried. The boy said, "It's easy. I just need to shoot hard enough to make holes in the cloth of night. That lets a little of the light of the sun shine through. Is that enough light, King Lion, for you to hunt by?" "That will do fine," said King Lion, and he lifted his great foot from the boy's tiny one and set off to hunt. The boy was so grateful to be free that he promised to make some more holes the next night. "And so he did," said Nomalanga, blowing her pipe smoke into the night. "And now there are millions and millions of stars because he worked so hard such a long, long time ago."
Chapter 12. Main Camp. Next morning, I heard the tourist truck long before I could see it. It sounded out of place in the peace of the morning. Nomalanga had washed my clothes, and I had cleaned my trainers the day before, and she'd lent me a razor, so I felt ready, on the outside at least, to meet people again. The truck arrived, and 6 foreigners got out. They spoke in English and asked Nomalanga questions about living in the wild. They kept saying "ooh" and "ah" and wanted to touch everything. Their guide was called Alfred. After Nomalanga had finished talking to the tourists, she and Alfred had a brief conversation about me. Alfred told me to sit in the front of the truck, beside him. I didn't know what to say to thank Nomalanga. She had given me a kind of peace, and Sibongile was quieter in my head. So I took both her hands in mine and kissed them. Then I got into the truck. I turned to wave to Nomalanga. She just stood, shading her eyes, watching us leave. A bright red and yellow cloth wound tightly round her. When we arrived at main camp, I couldn't believe it. It wasn't a camp at all. It was like a village. There were large buildings with grass roofs and open walls under 4 huge baobab trees. One of the buildings was a restaurant, and I saw gym machines and weights in another room. There were 2 pale blue swimming pools among flowering bushes with an artificial waterfall between them. There were chairs with cushions beside the pools. The whole place was high up, looking down on the lake. It was beautiful and certainly extremely expensive. Alfred made sure all his tourists were comfortable and then turned to me. "Let's go," he said, and I followed him to an office area looking out onto the pools. There was a fine but fierce-looking woman sitting behind a desk. "This is Tendai, ma'am," he said. "Tendai, this is Mrs. Ndlovu." Mrs. Ndlovu stood up. She was tall, and the belt and buttons on her smart safari suit shone brightly. "So, you're the runner?" she said, holding out a surprisingly small hand across the desk. I shook it. "Nomalanga told me about you, all the way from the border." Her voice sounded like she smoked a lot. I smiled, but didn't know what to say. I was thinking, could this really be the boss? "I wanted to ask you if you saw anyone during your trip," she said. "We found a dead rhinoceros yesterday. It had been caught and killed for its horn." "That's against the law," I said. "Exactly," she agreed. "And you think I'm the killer?" The tiniest feeling of anger lit up inside me. It made me feel more like my old self.
"No," she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out during a storm. "No, I know it wasn't you. I just wondered if you'd seen anyone out there."
You mean the guys who did kill it? I asked.
"Mm-hmm," she nodded.
I wish I had, I said. But I don't remember very much until about 2 days ago, when Nomalanga found me. I didn't see any people at all till then.
"Fair enough," she said. And then, "Nomalanga said you'd had a bad time. Do you really want to go back?"
I heard Alfred breathe in suddenly behind me. Sibongile was saying, "We must go back now. We need to talk to people and plan things." Until that moment, it hadn't occurred to me that I had a choice. I took a slow breath and said, "Not really. Not yet, no."
"I have an idea, you see," Mrs. Ndlovu said. "Have a seat."
She looked straight at Alfred.
"Thanks, Alfred," she said. "You can get some rest now."
Alfred looked at her without smiling or speaking for a couple of seconds. Then he turned and left us. I sat down in a huge, soft armchair. Mrs. Ndlovu opened a small fridge and took out a jug of orange juice.
"You see, Tendai," she said, "I need some more help round here. Juice?"
I nodded.
"We lost a driver a few days ago. Can you drive?"
"I got my license last winter," I told her, "but I've never driven anything like your safari trucks." The smell of the orange juice brought back memories of the farm where I grew up, and they cut me like a knife.
"Ah, but I need someone to drive me around, not the visitors."
She waved a hand at her legs, and I noticed for the first time that the bones of her right leg were bent and her foot was a strange shape. "Was it a landmine?" I asked before I could stop myself.
"No," she replied. "I was born like this."
Chapter 13. Driving Mrs. Ndlovu. There was a short pause. I drank some juice. I wasn't sure whether she expected me to go now.
"The landmines near your village," she said, "are the first to be found in that area."
"That's what people are saying," I answered. "There's a minefield across the river."
"Yes, I know about that."
The clouds were back in her face, and she looked confused and a bit angry.
"And I know a landmine survey was supposed to be done to check that the area was safe. This was before people first settled in the village."
"But that's years ago," I said.
"That's right. But the survey wasn't done then after all, and the present mayor began applying for money for one last year. I wonder."
I heard Sibongile's voice.
"And we'll go with Uncle Winston to see the mayor." "Never mind,"
said Mrs. Ndlovu suddenly. Her smile was back.
"You rest up today, eat plenty, get strong, and tomorrow you can drive me into town. I have things to do there, okay?"
I nodded again. "Sure," I said, and finished my juice. Was this too good to be true?
She said, "Good. Find yourself a room in the staff cottages and get a uniform from the laundry. I'll need you from 7 o'clock tomorrow morning."
That night, I watched a little TV, met some of the camp staff, and ate well. I saw Alfred briefly, but he didn't speak to me. I collected my uniform and slept in the first comfortable Western-style bed I'd seen since leaving school. Sibongile only spoke to me once as I was dropping off to sleep. She said, "We must do something quickly.
Okay, I said. Okay, we will. And I slept without tears. Mrs. Ndlovu's car was a large black Peugeot. She sat beside me in the front. I drove carefully but quite fast along the dirt road until we arrived at the smooth road. "Now you can really drive," she said. I thought, she's not so fierce after all. I settled into my seat and began to have fun. And so did she. It seemed she liked speed. She sang to the radio and punched my leg in time to the music once or twice. But I could hear Sibongile again. "We must do something." So I said to Mrs. Ndlovu, "About the landmine survey, do you know what the mayor's doing?" She turned the music down and moved so she could look at me. "The mayor learned last year about a European organization, a charity. The charity would provide half the money for the survey and the removal of landmines if he could find the other half." "And has he got the money?" I asked. "He got half from our central government. It helped that his brother works in the Ministry of Home Affairs." She was looking at me all the time, and I felt a bit embarrassed, but I insisted. "And the other half? From the charity?" "It was supposed to arrive a couple of months ago." We were coming into the town, and I realized with a shock that it was Sikumi, where Amos was in hospital. Tears made it difficult to see, but Mrs. Ndlovu's eyes never left my face. I made myself concentrate on her. "How do you know that?" I asked, taking a quick look at her. She was smiling a little. "I'm on the town council," she said. "I'm the deputy mayor." "Wow," I said. "Congratulations." I managed not to think about how I would feel if I saw Dad or Abigail. I drove slowly, looking for a parking space. Both sides of the road were lined with cars parked side by side, facing the pavement. Mrs. Ndlovu laughed and punched my leg again. "I got in touch with a small company in Victoria Falls to come and do the survey as soon as the money came through, but I guess it hasn't yet. Park here, at the bank." I nosed the car carefully into a space between two trucks. I got out and went round to open the door. Mrs. Ndlovu held out a hand, and I helped her out without meeting her eyes. She went into the bank. I leant against the Peugeot, trying to decide what to do. Should I ask Mrs. Ndlovu if there was time to visit Amos, or should I stay away from everything that reminded me of Sibongile? The driver of the vehicle next to me leant out of his window. "Hey, you knew?" he asked. He was smoking. "Yeah," I said. "Why? Do you know Mrs. Ndlovu?" "Everyone knows Mrs. Ndlovu." He winked at me, closing his right eye with a knowing smile. "How often does she come into town?" I asked, ignoring the wink. "At least once a week. It's usually Alfred who brings her." He drew slowly on his cigarette, looking questioningly at me. I wasn't interested in Mrs. Ndlovu's relationship with Alfred, so I said, "Right, see you around," and I got back into my driving seat. Mrs. Ndlovu came out of the bank. We went to a supermarket. I pushed the shopping trolley, and Mrs. Ndlovu put sugar, flour, and soft drinks into it. I wanted to ask her about talking to the mayor and about how much she was going to pay me, but this didn't feel like the right moment. At one point, she stood beside a freezer full of meat and looked at me with her head on one side. She said, "Would you like to eat with me tonight? We could have pepper steak." Her eyes were very wide, and a small smile spread across her lips. I had the sudden thought, She's trying to attract me. But I didn't really believe it. A powerful woman like that could have anyone she chose. But later, when we came to pay and I was standing behind her in the queue, she stepped back towards me as if she was going to fall and leant on my chest. She didn't stand away immediately, and her bottom pushed against me. She moved it in a way that I couldn't mistake. Wow, she's choosing me, I thought. I couldn't keep my breathing steady, and my heart was beating too fast. I helped her stand away from me again. Sibongile said, "Too many people do things because of how they feel rather than what they think." My body wanted me to shout, "Who cares about thinking?" "Thank you," said Mrs. Ndlovu, turning to me with a kind of secret smile. She paid at the checkout, and we went to the car. As we were putting the bags into the boot, Mrs. Ndlovu's hand touched mine. She didn't look at me, but she licked her large, soft lips. Sibongile said, "You are so sweet, and I think you don't know much about the dirty side of life." My stomach suddenly turned over in horror at myself. "Mrs. Ndlovu, excuse me," I said, "but I need the toilet." "Fine," she said with that smile again. "I'll wait in the car." I walked into the supermarket and along between the shelves towards the back. I found a door that said staff only. I pushed through it into the backyard. There were trucks and men working. I walked through the yard and out into the road at the back. What we do with our lives is what we give to ourselves, Sibongile said. I ran.